The scream tore through the frozen air like a knife, sharp and desperate, cutting across the stillness of the snowbound prairie where no human voice should have been heard for miles. Garrison reined in his horse so hard the animal reared, hooves pawing at the white sky, and for a moment he thought he had imagined it, that the howling wind had played tricks with his mind after 3 days alone on the trail. Then it came again, fainter this time, a woman's voice calling for help somewhere beyond the ridge of snow-covered cottonwoods that bordered the frozen creek bed. He urged his mount forward, his breath clouding in the bitter December air as his eyes scanned the landscape. The snowfall from last night had transformed the familiar terrain into something alien and treacherous, covering the ground in a thick white blanket that concealed the dangers beneath. Cole had been riding from his ranch outside Nevada, Missouri, heading toward town to pick up supplies before the next storm hit. But now, every instinct told him to find the source of that cry. The mare picked her way carefully down the slope, and Cole's heart hammered in his chest as he spotted movement ahead. A woman, her dark hair plastered against her face, was struggling in what appeared to be an innocent patch of snow-covered ground near the creek. But Cole recognized the danger immediately. The recent thaw followed by the sudden freeze and fresh snowfall had created a deadly trap. Beneath that pristine white surface lay mud, the kind that sucked you down and did not let go. "Hold still," he shouted, already unwinding the rope from his saddle. "Stop fighting it. You will only sink faster." The woman's face turned toward him, pale and terrified, her blue eyes wide with panic. She was up to her waist in the quickmud, her gloved hands scrabbling uselessly at the snow-covered surface around her. Her brown wool coat was soaked and heavy, dragging her down further with each passing second. "I cannot," she gasped, her voice breaking. "I cannot stop. It keeps pulling me. Listen to me." Cole swung down from his horse, keeping his voice firm and steady even as his pulse raced. "You have to stop moving. Every time you struggle, you sink deeper. You understand?" She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks as she forced herself to stillness. Cole could see the effort it took, the way her whole body trembled with the need to fight against the mud that held her. He moved as close as he dared, testing each step before putting his full weight down. The ground felt soft even through the snow, and he knew one wrong move would put him in the same deadly situation. "What is your name?" he asked, shaking out his rope and forming a loop. Fiona Vaughn." Her teeth were chattering now, whether from cold or fear he could not tell. "Well, Miss Vaughn, I am Cole Garrison, and I am going to get you out of there. When I throw this rope, I need you to get it around your chest and under your arms. Can you do that?" She nodded again, her lips pressed together in a tight line. Cole admired her courage even in the midst of her terror. He had seen grown men panic in situations like this, thrashing and screaming until the mud claimed them completely. The first throw fell short, and Cole cursed under his breath as he pulled the rope back. Fiona had sunk another inch, the mud now creeping up toward her chest. Her breathing was coming in short, sharp gasps, and he could see the panic starting to overtake her again. "Look at me, Fiona," he commanded, and her eyes snapped to his face. "You are going to be fine. I have pulled cattle from worse than this. Just keep breathing." The second throw was true, the loop landing perfectly within her reach. With trembling hands, she grabbed the rope and managed to work it around her body, getting it settled under her arms. Cole felt a surge of relief as he backed away carefully, wrapping the other end of the rope around his saddle horn. "Hold on tight," he called out. "This is going to hurt, but I need you to stay as straight as you can. Let the rope do the work." He mounted his horse and urged her forward slowly. The rope went taut, and he heard Fiona cry out as the pressure increased around her ribs. The mare strained, muscles bunching under her winter coat as she pulled against the weight. For a terrible moment nothing happened, and Cole feared the mud would win. Then, inch by inch, Fiona began to move. The Quickmud did not want to give up its prize. It sucked and pulled, making obscene sounds as Fiona's body slowly emerged. Cole kept the pressure steady, talking to his horse in a low, calm voice, even as his heart threatened to pound out of his chest. Fiona kept her eyes locked on his, using his gaze as an anchor while her body was dragged through the mud. When she finally came free, it happened all at once. The mud released her with a wet, gasping sound, and she fell forward onto the snow, coughing and sobbing. Cole was off his horse in an instant, rushing to her side. She was covered in thick gray mud from the waist down, her skirts heavy and sodden. "Can you stand?" he asked, his hands hovering over her, unsure where to touch without causing her further distress. "I think so," she managed, her voice hoarse. With his help, she got to her feet, though her legs shook so badly she could barely support her own weight. Cole wrapped his arm around her waist, taking most of her weight as he guided her away from the deadly patch of ground. "What in God's name were you doing out here alone?" he asked, once they were safely away from the Quickmud. He shrugged out of his heavy coat and draped it over her shoulders, though her lower half was so soaked that he knew she needed to get warm and dry soon or risk freezing. "My horse," she said, looking around with fresh distress. "She spooked at something and threw me. I landed in that and started sinking. I tried to get out, but the more I moved, the worse it got. She ran off, and I thought I was going to die out here." Cole followed her gaze and spotted tracks leading away through the snow. "We will find her later. Right now, we need to get you warm. My ranch is closer than town. Can you ride?" she nodded, though her face was deathly pale. Cole lifted her onto his mare, then swung up behind her, keeping one arm around her waist to hold her steady. She was shivering violently now, and he could feel the cold radiating from her wet clothes. He urged the horse into a canter, the fastest pace he dared risk on the snow-covered ground. The ride back to his ranch felt like it took hours, though it could not have been more than 30 minutes. Fiona sagged against him, her shivering becoming more sporadic, which worried him more than when she had been trembling constantly. He knew the signs of dangerous cold, had seen men lose fingers and toes to frostbite, had even lost a friend one winter who had fallen through ice and could not get warm fast enough. "Stay awake," he said, his mouth close to her ear. "Talk to me. Tell me where you were headed." "Nevada," she murmured, her voice slurred. "My aunt lives there. She owns the dress shop on Main Street. I was coming from St. Louis to live with her." "Sarah Vaughn?" Cole asked, recognizing the name. "She is a good woman. She will be worried sick when you do not arrive." "Cannot disappoint her," Fiona mumbled. "Just met her last month. She is all the family I have left now." Cole wanted to ask more, but Fiona's head lolled against his shoulder, and he felt a spike of fear. He kicked the mare into a faster pace, risking the treacherous ground. When his ranch house finally came into view, a modest wooden structure with smoke curling from the chimney, he nearly shouted with relief. He pulled up to the porch and dismounted, lifting Fiona down with him. She could barely stand, her eyes half closed and her lips tinged with blue. Cole half carried, half dragged her inside, kicking the door shut behind them. The warmth of the house hit them immediately. He had banked the fire before leaving that morning, and it was still putting out good heat. "We need to get you out of these wet clothes," he said, steering her toward the fireplace. The impropriety of the situation did not escape him, but he also knew that modesty was a luxury they could not afford right now. "Can you manage on your own, or do you need help?" Fiona's fingers fumbled uselessly at the buttons of her coat, and Cole realized she could not feel her hands well enough to work the fastenings. Keeping his touch as clinical as possible, he helped her out of the coat and began working on the buttons of her dress. Her skirts were the worst, heavy with mud and half frozen. He had to use his knife to cut through some of the ties. "There is a blanket on the chair," he said, averting his eyes as much as possible while still making sure she did not fall. "Wrap yourself in that while I get these wet things away from the fire." She did as he instructed, her movements slow and clumsy. Once she was covered, Cole gathered up the sodden garments and carried them to the back room where he did his washing. Then he returned to the main room and found her huddled by the fire, the blanket wrapped around her like a cocoon. She was still shivering, but her eyes were more focused now, and some color had returned to her cheeks. "I am going to make you something hot to drink," he said, moving to the stove. "Can you tell me if you are hurt anywhere? Any pain besides the cold?" "My ribs," she said softly, "where the rope was. But I do not think anything is broken, just sore." Cole nodded, putting a kettle on to boil. He found some dried herbs his sister had left during her last visit, the ones she swore by for shock and cold, and prepared a strong tea. While it was steeping, he carried a chair closer to the fire for her. "Here," he said, handing her the cup once it was ready. "Drink this slowly." Their fingers brushed as she took the cup, and for the first time, Cole really looked at her. Even bedraggled and muddy, with her dark hair hanging in tangled ropes around her face, she was beautiful. Her eyes were the color of a summer sky, bright and clear, and there was a strength in her jaw that spoke of determination. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, he guessed, close to his own age of 26. "Thank you," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his over the rim of the cup. "You saved my life. I do not know how I can ever repay you." "No repayment needed," Cole said gruffly, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Any decent person would have done the same. But you did not have to. You could have ridden past. You could have been too late." Her voice cracked on the last word, and he saw the terror of what had nearly happened wash over her again. "I was so scared. I could feel it pulling me down, and I knew if I went under that snow, no one would ever find me." Cole pulled another chair close to hers and sat down, his elbows on his knees. "But you did not go under. You kept your head and you stayed alive long enough for help to come. That took courage." "It did not feel like courage," she said, taking a sip of the tea. "It felt like blind panic." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the wind howling outside. Cole found himself studying her profile, the delicate line of her nose, the way the firelight played across her features. He had been alone on this ranch for too long, he told himself. That was why he was so affected by her presence. "I should ride into town," he said, standing abruptly. "Let your aunt know you are safe. She will be expecting you, in this weather." Fiona looked toward the window, where the light was already beginning to fade even though it could not have been much past 3 in the afternoon. "Another storm is coming. I can feel it." She was right. Cole could see the heavy gray clouds massing on the horizon, and the wind had that particular bite that promised heavy snow. He could make it to town if he left now, but the ride back would be treacherous in the dark with a storm blowing in. "She will be worried," Fiona said softly. "But I would rather she worry for one night than have you freeze to death trying to reach her in a blizzard." Cole nodded slowly. The practical part of him agreed with her assessment, but the proper part of him recoiled at the idea of having an unmarried woman alone in his house overnight. People would talk. In a town the size of Nevada, people always talked. "I have a spare room," he said finally. "It is not much, but it is warm and the bed is clean. You can stay there tonight and I will take you into town first thing in the morning." "Thank you," Fiona said again. She looked down at the blanket wrapped around her. "Although I am afraid I do not have anything to wear, my dress is ruined." Cole thought for a moment. My sister comes to visit sometimes. She keeps some clothes here for when she stays. You are about her size, I will get them for you." He went to the small bedroom that his sister Mary claimed as her own whenever she visited from Kansas City with her husband and children. In the chest at the foot of the bed, he found a simple dress of dark blue wool and some undergarments. He tried not to think too hard about the intimacy of handling such things as he carried them back to the main room. "The bedroom is just through there," he said, handing the clothes to Fiona. "You can change in privacy." She stood, clutching the blanket and clothes to her chest, and he noticed that her legs seemed steadier now. The warmth was doing its work. As she passed him, she paused, looking up at him with those remarkable blue eyes. "I truly do not know what I would have done if you had not come along," she said. "You are a good man, Cole Garrison." He felt heat rise in his cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "Get yourself dressed before you catch your death," he said, more gruffly than he intended. She smiled slightly at his discomfort and disappeared into the bedroom. Cole stood staring at the closed door for a long moment before shaking himself and turning to more practical matters. They would need to eat, and he should check on the animals in the barn. The storm would hit soon, and he wanted to make sure everything was secured. By the time Fiona emerged from the bedroom, dressed in Mary's clothes with her hair combed back and braided loosely over one shoulder, Cole had put together a simple meal of beans and salt pork with some of the bread he had baked 2 days before. It was plain fare, bachelor food, but it was hot and filling. They ate in a surprisingly comfortable silence, and Cole found himself watching her when he thought she was not looking. There was something about her that drew him, something beyond her obvious beauty. Perhaps it was the way she had kept her composure in the face of death, or the quiet gratitude in her eyes, or simply the fact that it had been so long since he had shared his table with anyone other than his occasional ranch hands. "How long have you lived here?" Fiona asked, breaking the silence. 5 years, Cole said. "I came out from Tennessee with my family in '58. My father wanted to start fresh after the farm failed back home. He and my mother took a place closer to town, but I wanted my own land. Built this place with my own hands 3 years ago." "It is a good house," Fiona said, looking around at the solid walls and sturdy furniture. "You can tell it was built with care." "I had help from my father and brother," Cole admitted. "But yes, I wanted it done right, wanted something that would last, that I could be proud of." "Are you close with your family?" she asked, and he heard a note of wistfulness in her voice. "Close enough," he said. "My parents are getting older, and my brother married a girl from St. Joseph last year. They are expecting their first child in the spring. My sister married well and moved to the city, but she visits when she can. What about you? You said your aunt is all the family you have left." Fiona's face clouded over, and she looked down at her plate. "My parents died last year. Yellow fever. It swept through St. Louis like wildfire. I was away at the time, visiting a friend in the countryside, and by the time I got back, they were already gone." "I am sorry," Cole said quietly, and he meant it. He could not imagine losing both parents at once, the sudden loneliness that must have followed. "My aunt wrote to me afterward. I had never met her. There had been some kind of falling out between her and my father years ago, before I was born. But she reached out, said I should come stay with her if I wanted, that she could teach me the dressmaking trade." Fiona looked up, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I had nothing left in St. Louis. Everything reminded me of them. So I sold what little we had and took the train as far as I could, then hired a horse to make the rest of the journey. I suppose I should have waited for better weather, but I was so eager to start over, to have family again." Cole reached across the table without thinking and covered her hand with his. "You will get there. Tomorrow, when the storm passes, I will make sure you reach your aunt safely." She turned her hand over beneath his, her fingers curling around his palm. "You have already done so much." They stayed like that for a moment, hands clasped across the table, and Cole felt something shift in his chest. It was dangerous, this feeling. He barely knew this woman. But there was something about her, something that made him want to know more, to keep her here in his house where he could see that she was safe and warm. The wind rattled the windows, pulling them both back to the present. Cole reluctantly released her hand and stood, clearing the dishes. "The storm is here. We should get some sleep. It will likely blow through by morning." Fiona helped him clean up despite his protests, and then he showed her to his sister's room again. He brought extra blankets, making sure she would be warm enough through the night. "If you need anything, I will be right out here," he said from the doorway. "Do not hesitate to call out." "Thank you, Cole," she said softly, "for everything." He nodded and pulled the door shut, then stood in the main room listening to the storm rage outside. He banked the fire and laid out his bedroll near the hearth, but sleep was long in coming. He kept thinking about the woman in the next room, about how close she had come to dying in that frozen mud, about the feel of her hand in his. When he finally slept, his dreams were full of blue eyes and dark hair, of ropes and snow and a voice calling for help that he would always answer. The storm blew itself out sometime before dawn. Cole woke to pale gray light filtering through the windows and the profound silence that follows a heavy snowfall. He stood and stretched, his back protesting from sleeping on the floor, and went to look outside. The world had been transformed into a pristine white landscape, with drifts piled high against the house and barn. He was building up the fire when Fiona emerged from the bedroom, her hair loose around her shoulders, and sleep still softening her features. "Good morning," she said, her voice still husky from sleep. "Morning," Cole replied, trying not to stare at how beautiful she looked with her hair down. "I will make some breakfast and then we can head into town. The snow is deep, but we should be able to make it." They ate a quick meal of fried eggs and more of the bread. Then Cole went to saddle his horse while Fiona gathered her things. Her ruined dress and coat were still damp, so he wrapped them in an oilcloth for her to take. The ride into Nevada took longer than expected. The snow was knee-deep on the horse in places, and they had to pick their way carefully. Fiona sat in front of him again, and Cole tried not to think about how right it felt to have her in his arms, how her presence seemed to fill something hollow inside him. The town of Nevada, Missouri, was a modest settlement that had grown up around the confluence of several important trails. By 1863, it had a main street lined with businesses, a church, a school, and enough houses to support a population of a few hundred souls. Cole guided his horse down Main Street toward the dress shop he knew belonged to Sarah Vaughn. They had barely stopped in front of the shop when the door flew open and a woman rushed out. She was in her 40s, with dark hair streaked with gray and the same blue eyes as Fiona. "Fiona," she cried, her hands flying to her mouth. "Oh, thank God, I was so worried. When you did not arrive yesterday, I thought the worst." Cole helped Fiona down, and she was immediately enveloped in her aunt's embrace. The two women clung to each other, and Cole saw tears streaming down both their faces. "I am so sorry, Aunt Sarah," Fiona said. "My horse threw me and I got stuck in Quickmud. If it had not been for Mr. Garrison, I would have died out there." Sarah turned to Cole, her eyes wide. "You saved her life. I just happened to be riding past at the right time," Cole said, uncomfortable with the attention. "Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone," Sarah said firmly. She reached out and gripped his arm. "You brought my niece back to me. I can never thank you enough. Please, come inside. Let me at least give you a hot meal and proper thanks." Cole wanted to refuse, to ride back to his ranch and put some distance between himself and these feelings that were growing too strong too fast. But Fiona was looking at him with those blue eyes, and he found himself nodding. Sarah's shop occupied the ground floor of a two-story building, with her living quarters above. She led them upstairs to a cozy parlor and bustled about making tea and setting out food. Cole found himself sitting on a comfortable sofa with Fiona beside him, telling the story of the rescue while Sarah listened with wide eyes and exclamations of horror. "That Quickmud near the creek has claimed lives before," Sarah said when the tale was finished. "The snow covering it made it even more treacherous. You are very lucky, Fiona, and you, Mr. Garrison, are a hero." "Just Cole, please," he said. "And I am no hero." "You are to me," Fiona said quietly, her eyes meeting his. Cole felt his heart kick against his ribs. He needed to leave, to get out of here before he did something foolish like ask if he could call on her. She had just arrived in town, just suffered a terrible ordeal. The last thing she needed was a rough rancher complicating her life. He stood abruptly. "I should be getting back to my place. I have animals to tend to." "Of course," Sarah said, standing as well. "But please, you must come to dinner soon. It is the least we can do to thank you properly." "That is not necessary," Cole said, but Sarah waved away his protests. "I insist. How about this Sunday, after church?" Cole found himself agreeing, though a voice in his head told him it was a mistake. Fiona walked him to the door, and for a moment they stood in the narrow hallway alone. "I meant what I said," she told him. "You saved my life. I will never forget that." "Just be more careful in the future," Cole said, trying to keep his tone light. "Watch out for snow-covered ground near water." "I will," she promised. Then, rising on her toes, she kissed his cheek. It was a brief, chaste kiss, but Cole felt it like a brand. "Thank you, Cole Garrison." He left before he could do something foolish like pull her into his arms and kiss her properly. The ride back to his ranch seemed twice as long as the ride into town, and his cheek burned where her lips had touched. The days until Sunday crawled by with agonizing slowness. Cole threw himself into work, repairing the barn roof that had been damaged in the storm, checking on his small herd of cattle, chopping enough wood to last through the rest of winter. But no matter how hard he worked, he could not stop thinking about Fiona Vaughn. Sunday morning found him bathing and shaving with more care than usual, putting on his best shirt and jacket. He told himself he was just being polite, that it was proper to dress well for church and dinner. But he knew the truth. He wanted Fiona to see him at his best. The church in Nevada was a simple white building with a tall steeple. Cole arrived early and took his usual place near the back. He was watching the door when Sarah and Fiona entered. Fiona wore a dress of deep green that brought out the color of her eyes, and her dark hair was pinned up in an elaborate style. She looked around the church, and when her eyes found his, her face lit up with a smile that made his breath catch. They joined him in his pew, Fiona sliding in beside him while Sarah sat on her other side. Cole tried to focus on the sermon, but he was intensely aware of Fiona next to him. Their shoulders brushed when they stood to sing hymns, and he could smell the faint scent of lavender that clung to her. After the service, several people stopped to welcome Fiona to town and to congratulate Cole on his heroic rescue. News traveled fast in a small town, and everyone seemed to know the story. Cole endured the attention as gracefully as he could, but he was relieved when they finally made it back to Sarah's place. The dinner was delicious, a proper roasted chicken with vegetables and fresh bread. Sarah was an excellent cook, and the conversation flowed easily. Cole found himself relaxing, laughing at stories about Fiona's childhood in St. Louis and sharing tales of his own youth in Tennessee. "I think you two make a handsome couple," Sarah said suddenly, and Cole nearly choked on his coffee. Fiona blushed scarlet, her eyes going wide. "Aunt Sarah," she protested, but Sarah just smiled serenely. "I am too old to waste time with subtlety," she said. "Cole, you are a good man with a good ranch. Fiona is a lovely young woman who needs a fresh start. I see the way you look at each other. It seems to me that fate put you in the right place at the right time for more than one reason." Cole did not know what to say. The matchmaking was so blatant it should have been offensive, but there was a twinkle in Sarah's eye that took the sting out of it. He glanced at Fiona, wondering if she was mortified, but she was looking at him with curiosity rather than embarrassment. "I would like to call on Fiona if she would permit it," Cole found himself saying. "Properly, I mean. With your permission, Miss Vaughn." "Sarah," Fiona said, turning to her aunt with a pleading look. "Could you give us a moment alone?" "Of course," Sarah said, rising from the table. "I have some work to do in the shop. Take your time." When she was gone, Fiona turned back to Cole. "You do not have to do this out of some sense of obligation. You saved my life, but that does not mean you owe me anything more." "Is that what you think this is?" Cole asked, leaning forward. "Obligation? Is it not?" Fiona's voice was small, uncertain. "No," Cole said firmly. He reached across the table and took her hand, the same way he had that first night. "I have not been able to stop thinking about you. Every time I close my eyes, I see you smiling at me. I know we just met. I know it is probably too soon. But I would like the chance to know you better, to see where this might lead, if you want that too." Fiona's eyes searched his face, and slowly a smile spread across her features. "I want that," she said softly. "I have been thinking about you too. Wondering if I imagined how safe I felt with you, how right it seemed to be in your arms." Cole felt something warm unfurl in his chest. "You did not imagine it." They sat there, hands clasped across the table, grinning at each other like fools until Sarah returned and shooed Cole out, saying Fiona needed her rest and he would have plenty of time for courting in the days to come. Cole left walking on air, his heart lighter than it had been in years. As he rode back to his ranch through the cold winter evening, he found himself whistling, making plans. He would court Fiona properly, the way she deserved. He would take her on picnics when the weather warmed, teach her to ride a good horse, show her all the beautiful places on his land. And if things went the way he hoped, if she came to care for him the way he was already caring for her, maybe by next winter she would be sharing his name and his home. The courtship that followed was the sweetest time of Cole's life. He rode into town every Sunday after church to have dinner with Fiona and Sarah, and often he found excuses to visit during the week as well. He brought Fiona small gifts, a pretty stone he found by the creek, wildflowers when they began to bloom in early spring, a carved wooden box he made with his own hands. Fiona, for her part, was learning the dressmaking trade from her aunt and thriving in her new life. The sadness that had shadowed her eyes when they first met gradually lifted, replaced by a joy that made her even more beautiful. She made friends in town, became a regular at the church socials, and slowly built a life for herself in Nevada. But it was the time she spent with Cole that made her truly happy. He was unlike any man she had known in St. Louis. He was honest and hardworking, with a quiet strength that made her feel protected without making her feel small. He listened when she talked, truly listened, and he shared his thoughts with her in a way that made her feel trusted and valued. As winter gave way to spring and spring bloomed into summer, their feelings deepened. Cole found himself falling in love, truly and completely. It terrified him sometimes, the intensity of what he felt for her, but it also filled him with a joy he had never known. One evening in early June, Cole took Fiona for a ride out to his ranch. It was the first time she had been back since that terrifying first day, and he wanted her to see it the way it truly was, not just as the place where she had nearly died. The prairie was alive with color, wildflowers carpeting the ground in shades of purple and yellow and white. The air was warm and sweet, full of the sound of birdsong and the buzzing of bees. Cole had packed a picnic, and they spread a blanket near the creek, far from the deadly spot where they had met but close enough to hear the water gurgling over stones. They ate and talked and laughed, and as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Cole knew the time had come. "Fiona," he said, taking her hand, "there is something I need to ask you." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset. "What is it?" Cole reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond. It had been his grandmother's ring, brought all the way from Tennessee, and his mother had given it to him with tears in her eyes and instructions to give it to the woman he loved. "I know we have not been courting for very long," Cole said, his heart hammering in his chest, "but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Fiona Vaughn. I love your courage and your kindness. I love the way you laugh and the way you look at the world. I love waking up knowing I will see you soon, and I hate having to ride away at the end of each day. I want you to be my wife. I want to build a life with you, right here on this land. Will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Fiona's face, but she was smiling, beaming at him with such joy that Cole felt his own eyes begin to sting. "Yes," she said, throwing her arms around his neck. "Yes, Cole Garrison, I will marry you. I love you too. I think I have loved you since the moment you threw that rope to me, since I looked into your eyes and knew I was going to be safe." Cole kissed her then, properly and thoroughly, pouring all of his love and hope and dreams for the future into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. They were married in August, in the little white church in Nevada, with what seemed like the whole town in attendance. Fiona wore a dress she and Sarah had made together, white silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried wildflowers from the prairie. Cole wore a new black suit that made him look uncomfortable but handsome, and he could not stop smiling as he watched his bride walk down the aisle toward him. Sarah wept openly, happy to see her niece so joyful. Cole's parents and siblings had come from their various homes to witness the wedding, and his mother embraced Fiona like a daughter, whispering that she had prayed for someone like Fiona to come into Cole's life. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Cole kissed Fiona to cheers and applause from the congregation. They had a celebration afterward in the church hall, with food and music and dancing that lasted long into the evening. But Cole's favorite part of the day was when they finally left the party, riding out to his ranch. Their ranch now, as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Fiona sat in front of him on his horse, her head resting against his shoulder, and Cole felt a sense of completeness he had never known before. "I cannot believe this is real," Fiona said softly as they approached the house. "That I am actually your wife, that this is my home now." "Believe it," Cole said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You are mine and I am yours, for the rest of our lives." He carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the main room. The house looked different now. Over the past few weeks, Fiona had been bringing her things from Sarah's place, adding feminine touches. There were curtains on the windows now, a tablecloth on the table, a rag rug by the hearth. It looked like a home instead of just a place to sleep. Their first year of marriage was not without its challenges. Ranch life was hard, especially for someone who had grown up in a city. Fiona had to learn to cook on a wood stove, to tend a garden, to help with the animals when needed. There were days when she was exhausted, when she missed the conveniences of St. Louis or the company of her aunt. But there were far more days filled with joy. Cole was an attentive and loving husband, always patient when she struggled with a new skill, always ready with encouragement and praise. He taught her to ride properly, and soon she was comfortable enough to accompany him when he checked the cattle or rode to the far corners of their property. They worked together to expand the ranch, building a larger barn and adding to their herd. Fiona proved to have a good head for business, keeping meticulous records of their expenses and income, finding ways to stretch their money further. She also continued to help Sarah with the dress shop when she could, maintaining that connection to her aunt and to the town. The seasons turned, winter giving way to spring and spring to summer again. On a warm July evening, Fiona found Cole in the barn and told him the news she had been holding close to her heart for weeks. They were going to have a child. Cole's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy, then set her down carefully as though she were made of glass. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hands cradling her face. "Are you feeling well? Do you need to sit down? Should we get the doctor?" Fiona laughed, covering his hands with hers. "I am fine. The baby will not come until winter. We have plenty of time to prepare." Cole pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "A baby," he murmured into her hair. "Our baby, I cannot believe it." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Fiona said, and she meant it. She had seen how gentle Cole was with animals, how patient he was with children when they visited town. She knew their child would be loved and cherished. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Fiona bloomed, her face glowing with health and happiness. Cole fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more, refusing to let her do anything too strenuous. He built a cradle with his own hands, carving delicate patterns into the wood, and Fiona sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of anticipation. Their son was born on a snowy February night, just over 2 years after Fiona had nearly died in the Quickmud. The birth was long and difficult, but when Cole finally heard his child's first cry, he felt tears stream down his face. The midwife cleaned the baby and placed him in Cole's arms, and he stared down at the tiny face in wonder. "He is perfect," Cole whispered when the midwife allowed him into the bedroom where Fiona lay exhausted but smiling. "You did so well, love. He is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Fiona asked, reaching out to touch their son's downy head. They had discussed names for months but had never quite decided. Cole looked down at the baby, then at his wife, and suddenly he knew. "How about Daniel?" he suggested. "After your father." "So a part of him lives on." Fresh tears spilled down Fiona's cheeks, but she was smiling. "Daniel Garrison. It is perfect." Little Daniel proved to be a happy baby, quick to smile and easy-tempered. Cole was completely besotted with his son, spending every free moment holding him, talking to him, showing him around the ranch as though the infant could understand his father's explanations of cattle and horses and crops. Fiona watched her husband and son together and felt her heart could not possibly hold more love. But somehow it did, expanding to encompass this new life they had created, this little person who was part her and part Cole, the living embodiment of their love. Sarah was a doting great-aunt, visiting often and bringing gifts for the baby. Cole's family came to meet their newest member, and his mother declared that Daniel had Cole's stubborn chin and Fiona's beautiful eyes. The years that followed were filled with the ordinary joys and challenges of family life. Daniel grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious boy, following his father everywhere and asking endless questions. Cole taught him to ride as soon as he was big enough to sit a horse, and Fiona taught him his letters and numbers, determined that her son would have a good education. When Daniel was 3, Fiona discovered she was pregnant again. This time they were blessed with twins, a boy and a girl. Thomas came first, red-faced and squalling, followed 10 minutes later by his sister, who they named Elizabeth. Cole was overwhelmed, holding one baby in each arm and looking at Fiona as though she had performed a miracle. 3 children, he said, shaking his head in wonder. We have 3 children. We do, Fiona agreed, exhausted but happy. Our family is growing. Life became busier with 3 little ones to care for, but also richer. The house was always full of noise and laughter, of children playing and crying and learning. Cole and Fiona worked together as partners in everything, raising their children, running their ranch, building their life. On quiet evenings when the children were asleep and they sat together by the fire, Cole would sometimes think back to that snowy December day when he had heard a scream on the wind. What if he had been riding a different trail? What if he had been too late? What if Fiona had sunk beneath that snow before he could reach her? But she had not. He had been there at the right moment, and from that terrible danger had grown the greatest blessing of his life. Sometimes he told Fiona these thoughts, and she would smile and take his hand and tell him that she believed they were meant to find each other, that fate, or God, or whatever force governed the universe, had brought them together in that moment, because their lives were meant to be entwined. Cole was not a man given to believing in fate, but he could not argue with the evidence of his own life. He had found love in the most unlikely circumstances, and that love had grown into a family, a home, a life that was richer than anything he had imagined when he was a lonely bachelor rancher. As the children grew, the ranch prospered. Cole's hard work and Fiona's business sense combined to make their operation one of the most successful in the area. They were able to hire help, to expand their holdings, to provide well for their family. But the wealth they accumulated was nothing compared to the wealth they found in each other and in their children. Daniel grew into a young man much like his father, tall and strong with a deep love for the land. Thomas was more scholarly, always with his nose in a book, dreaming of becoming a lawyer or a teacher. Elizabeth was spirited and independent, declaring at age 10 that she was going to run the ranch someday, and no one could stop her. Cole and Fiona watched their children grow with pride and occasional terror. Parenthood was not easy, and there were disagreements and difficult moments. But through it all, their love for each other remained the foundation on which everything else was built. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Cole took Fiona back to the spot where they had met. It was August, the prairie blooming with late summer flowers, and the creek babbled peacefully nearby. They stood hand in hand, looking at the ground that had once nearly claimed Fiona's life. "Do you remember how scared you were?" Cole asked softly. "Terrified," Fiona admitted. "I truly thought I was going to die there, and then I heard your voice and I knew I had a chance. I think my heart stopped when I saw you sinking into that mud," Cole said. "I have never been so afraid in my life." "But you saved me," Fiona said, squeezing his hand. "And not just that day. You saved me from grief and loneliness. You gave me a home and a family and a reason to wake up happy every morning." "You did the same for me," Cole said, turning to face her. "Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You made me live again. You made everything brighter and better." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and it was like kissing her for the first time, full of promise and passion and love. When they broke apart, both were smiling. "Should we head back?" Fiona asked. "The children will be wondering where we are." "Let them wonder a little longer," Cole said, pulling her close again. "I want to spend a few more minutes alone with my wife, in the place where our story began." They stood there in the warm sunshine, holding each other, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together. Around them, the prairie stretched out in all directions, vast and beautiful and full of life. It was a hard land, unforgiving at times, but it was their land. It was home. The years continued to pass, marked by the usual milestones of family life. Birthdays and holidays, harvests and hard winters, moments of joy and periods of challenge. Cole and Fiona weathered it all together, their bond growing stronger with each passing year. When Sarah grew too old to run her dress shop alone, Elizabeth, who had inherited her mother's skill with needle and thread along with her grandmother's head for business, took over much of the daily operation. Daniel married a girl from a neighboring ranch and began building his own place on land Cole gave him. Thomas went away to school in Kansas City, making his parents proud with his scholarly achievements. Cole and Fiona became grandparents, then grandparents many times over. Their house was always full when the family gathered, voices and laughter echoing off the walls that Cole had built with his own hands so many years ago. On quiet evenings, they would sit on the porch Cole had added to the house, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Fiona's hair was streaked with silver now, and Cole's beard was more gray than brown, but when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had fallen in love over a decade ago. "You have any regrets?" Fiona asked one evening, her hand in Cole's as they watched the sun sink toward the horizon. Cole thought about the question seriously, as he always did when Fiona asked him something important. "No," he said finally, "not a single one. Everything I have done, every choice I made led me to you. Led me to this life. How could I regret any of it, even the hard parts?" Fiona pressed. "The years when money was tight, the winter we lost half the herd, the time Daniel broke his arm, even those," Cole confirmed. "The hard parts made us stronger, they taught us what we were made of. And we always had each other to lean on." Fiona nodded, satisfied. "I feel the same way. Sometimes I think about that day, about being trapped in the Quickmud, about how terrified I was. And then I think about what came after, about everything we have built together, and I cannot help but think that maybe I had to go through that terror to find this joy. I am just grateful I was riding past at the right moment," Cole said, lifting her hand to his lips and pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I am grateful for every moment since." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they could hear their youngest grandchild, Daniel's daughter, singing a lullaby her mother had taught her. The sound was sweet and pure, a promise of the future continuing beyond them. "We did well, didn't we?" Fiona said softly. "We built something good here." "We did," Cole agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." As the years advanced and they grew older still, Cole and Fiona's love never diminished. They were partners in the truest sense, facing whatever came together. When Cole's father passed away, Fiona held him while he grieved. When Fiona fell ill one winter, Cole nursed her back to health with tender patience. They celebrated their 20th anniversary, then their 25th, then their 30th. Each milestone was marked with quiet gratitude for the gift of time together, for the life they had built from that moment of crisis and rescue so long ago. Their grandchildren grew and had children of their own. The ranch passed primarily into Daniel's capable hands, though Cole and Fiona remained involved as long as they were able. Elizabeth's dress shop thrived, becoming one of the most successful businesses in Nevada. Thomas became a respected judge in Kansas City, but visited often, always eager to return to the land where he had grown up. Cole and Fiona watched it all with deep satisfaction, knowing that their legacy was not just the land or the businesses, but the family they had created together. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried forward their values of hard work, integrity, and above all, love. On a warm spring day, when they were both well into their 60s, Cole and Fiona took one last ride out to the creek where they had met. Cole's joints were stiff now, and Fiona's hands were knotted with age, but they managed to mount the gentle horses their son had saddled for them. They rode slowly, taking their time, pointing out landmarks and sharing memories. When they reached the spot, they dismounted carefully and stood hand in hand, looking at the ground that had been covered with snow that fateful December day so many years ago. "If I had known then what I know now," Fiona said, "I would have thanked that Quickmud for bringing you to me." Cole laughed, the sound warm and rich. "That is a strange thing to be grateful for, love." "But true," Fiona insisted. "Everything good in my life started that day. You, our children, our grandchildren, this beautiful land. All of it grew from that moment of terror." Cole pulled her close, marveling as he always did that she still fit perfectly in his arms. "Then I suppose I should be grateful too. Grateful for the scream that led me to you. Grateful for the Quickmud that trapped you long enough for me to find you. Grateful for every single day since." They stood there for a long time, two elderly people holding each other in the sunshine, surrounded by the beauty of the prairie they loved. They had lived a good life, a full life, a life rich with love and family and purpose. And it had all started here with a rope thrown in desperation and caught in hope. As they rode slowly back to the ranch house, where their family waited to celebrate Fiona's birthday, Cole thought about legacy. What would people remember about them when they were gone? The successful ranch, the thriving businesses, the large, loving family, all of those things mattered. But what mattered most was the love that had sparked between them and never died. That was the real legacy, the real triumph. They had loved each other deeply and well, and that love had created ripples that would continue long after they were gone. The birthday celebration was joyous and chaotic, with what seemed like dozens of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filling the house and spilling out into the yard. There was food and music and laughter, and at the center of it all, Cole and Fiona sat together, watching their family with deep contentment. That evening, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Cole helped Fiona up to their bedroom. They were both exhausted but happy, filled with the warm glow that comes from being surrounded by loved ones. As they prepared for bed, moving through the familiar routine they had followed for decades, Cole caught Fiona watching him in the mirror. "What is it?" he asked. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am," she said. "How blessed. To have found you, to have had all these years together, to have this beautiful family. Not everyone gets that, Cole. Not everyone finds their person and gets to spend a lifetime with them." Cole crossed to her and wrapped his arms around her from behind, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "I am the lucky one. You brought light into my life, Fiona. You made everything better." They stood there for a moment, two people who had loved each other for more than 40 years, who had built a life and a family together, who had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs side by side. In the mirror, Cole could see the gray in their hair, the lines on their faces, the marks of time and age. But when he looked at Fiona, he still saw the beautiful young woman he had pulled from the Quickmud all those years ago. As they climbed into bed, Fiona curled into Cole's side the way she had every night of their marriage. His arm came around her automatically, holding her close, and she sighed with contentment. "I love you, Cole Garrison," she murmured, already half asleep. "Thank you for throwing me that rope." "I love you too, Fiona Garrison," Cole replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Thank you for catching it." They drifted off to sleep together, comfortable and content, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built. Outside, the Missouri wind whispered through the prairie grasses, carrying with it the scent of wildflowers and the promise of tomorrow. The ranch slept peacefully under a canopy of stars, the land that had witnessed their love story continuing its eternal cycle of seasons. Cole and Fiona lived many more years together, each one precious, each one a gift. They saw more grandchildren married, more great-grandchildren born. They celebrated holidays and anniversaries. They sat on their porch and watched the sun set over the prairie they had called home for so long. And when the time finally came for them to leave this world, they did so within months of each other, neither able to bear much time without the other. Cole went first, passing peacefully in his sleep one winter night with Fiona holding his hand. She followed that spring, slipping away on a warm May afternoon with all her children gathered around her. They were buried side by side in the cemetery on the edge of Nevada, their graves marked with simple headstones. But their real memorial was in the lives they had touched, the family they had raised, the love they had shared. Daniel and his children continued to work the ranch, keeping the land that Cole and Fiona had loved so much in the family. Elizabeth's dress shop thrived for another generation. Thomas's children and grandchildren carried forward his legacy of education and public service. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, the family would gather on the porch of the old ranch house, and someone would tell the story of how it all began. How Fiona had been trapped in Quickmud under fresh fallen snow. How Cole had thrown a rope and pulled her free. How from that moment of danger and rescue had grown a love that lasted a lifetime and created a legacy that would endure for generations. It was a story worth telling, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, that courage and love can triumph over fear and danger, that when two people find each other, truly find each other, they can build something beautiful that lasts long after they are gone. The prairie remembered them, the land they had loved and worked and built their lives upon. The creek still bubbled and flowed, and if you knew where to look, you could still find the spot where the Quickmud had trapped a young woman so many years ago. But now it was just another part of the landscape, no longer dangerous, just a reminder of how two lives had intersected in the most unlikely way. And in the house, Cole had built with his own hands, in the rooms where Fiona had raised their children, their family continued to gather. They continued to love and laugh and build their own lives, carrying forward the values and lessons Cole and Fiona had taught them. The greatest of which was simply this: love deeply, work hard, and never take for granted the precious gift of each day together. That was the true ending to Cole and Fiona's story, not in death, but in the continuation of all they had built and loved. In children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their names and their legacy forward. In a ranch that still prospered under the care of their descendants. In stories told and retold, keeping their memory alive for generations to come. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Cole and Fiona were together still, their hands clasped, their love eternal. They had lived a good life, a full life, a life worth living. They had found each other in the most dramatic circumstances, and they had never let go. That was their triumph. That was their legacy. That was their happily ever after. And it was more than either of them could have dreamed of on that snowy December day, when a scream on the wind changed both their lives forever.